All right, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh. Today we're just doing a new EP review. This is going to be our second one. We just do these periodically. Basically, just whenever I feel like I listen to an EP that I think is, worth talking about. This one definitely is. This is going to be the latest Yves Tumor EP, titled The Asymptotical World. I think that's how you pronounce it. But anyways, yeah, this is the latest EP released by the experimental artist Yves Tumor that dropped an album last year that I guess I was on the fence of covering, but I just never got around to it, and I was right at the formation of the podcast. We'll talk about that a bit later. And yeah, this EP was released July 15th, so we're just at about a month of the time frame I give myself to talk about a project. I really wanted to get an album squeezed in before this July 15th date or July 16th date, but I just couldn't really find myself to cover anything that I thought was that interesting for some reason. But I did probably miss some albums that dropped a lot in July and maybe late June. But I'm just going to get around to more stuff coming up. I think I'm going to do that Killers review, the latest Killers album, mainly because the last one they released last year in the fall was probably my best streamed review. So I thought that's a little interesting and weird to me, that the Killers are like that the Killers are the most streamed, I guess, review I've done for this year-long run that the podcast has pretty much been on. But anyways, yeah, enough about that. And yeah, before we talk about this latest EP, just want to let everyone know the latest album review dropped not too long ago, August 7th, with the latest Clairo album titled Sling. I thought that was a pretty deep project. Definitely a big contrast and shift from her previous work on her debut album. This one was produced by Jack Antonoff, so definitely you can hear some of his charm and I guess production quirks in there. So decent album, thought it was interesting. A lot of tracks in there that stick out quite nicely. And another thing I did on the YouTube side was drop something called Talking Tracks. This is the second episode I've done of that. And I thought the episode went quite well. If you haven't listened to it, just type in the music reviewer on YouTube. It's definitely on there. It's the latest uploaded video prior to this Yves Tumor review. Talked about various artists on there. If you're wanting to give it a listen, we have a track by Turnstile on there, Still Woozy, Porches, Remy Wolf, Mississippi, Young Pitch, Jungle. Those are just some of them. We also covered some Sam Fender, Unknown Mortal Orchestra, and then the latest collab by Aventura and Bad Bunny. Also, if you're not aware, if you haven't noticed, I stopped doing Best and Worst Track of the Week on the podcast, but what I'm doing is I'm releasing it on Talking Tracks. I'm putting it as like an end segment. So if you're missing Best and Worst Track of the Week, I basically condensed it. It's now there as well on the Talking Tracks. Every time a Talking Tracks is put out, I'll cover Best and Worst Track of the Week for the weeks I missed. So the latest one's for July 31st and August 7th. So if you're just interested in that at all, if you missed Best and Worst Track of the Week, you can find it there. But yeah, anyways, that's pretty much updates on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in today once again. And we'll get into the gist of the review. All right, everyone. So like I was saying earlier in the podcast, this is episode 2 of the EP review mini-series that we're doing, The Asymptotical World by Yves Tumor. The first one we did was from the latest Sam Gelatry album review, or EP review that dropped earlier this year. Up until then, that was probably one of my favorite projects of this year. The review did quite well. A lot of people, seemed to be interested in what I had to say. Relative size at least. I gotta say, this latest Yves Tumor EP is really great. I think this takes the cake for probably my favorite project that's been dropped this year. Now, I am planning on doing another worth a listen off of another project that was recently released, so stay tuned for that. I thought that was a really solid project released this year, but this one is just great from front to end. But first of all, let's go ahead and give some story or just some background info on who Yves Tumor is. Their name is Sean Bowie, but they go by the alias Yves Tumor. They're an American artist, musician, producer. They were born in Miami, but they're currently based in Italy. It seemed that by some point they moved to Europe and pretty much just based themselves there, which I thought is pretty cool. Anytime someone moves from the States to like somewhere else in the world, I think that's pretty interesting. But according to the bio on them, it looks like they started using music as an outlet when they turned 16 to escape from quote-unquote a dull and conservative surroundings around them. They lived in Tennessee when they were growing up. And then early on, Yves taught themselves to become a multi-instrumentalist, learning drums, bass, guitar, and keyboard. And around the early 2010s, Yves recorded music under the moniker Teams. The music was described by various publications as post-chillwave, which kind of makes sense for being around 2010. In 2015, Yves Tumor dropped a project under the name for the first time as an EP, and that was released under the Berlin experimental label Janus. The same year, Yves released their debut album titled When Man Fails. And in 2018, Yves released their Warped Records debut titled Safe in the Hands of Love. The album was universally acclaimed and was even credited by Pitchfork as being leaps ahead of anything the artist has released to date. So I guess if you wanted a nice milestone, maybe check out Safe in the Hands of Love, because I guess that's probably one of the most critically acclaimed projects Yves Tumor has dropped. I honestly didn't really get into Yves at all until maybe about last year with their most recent full-length release, Heaven to a Tortured Mind. So I'm not really too familiar with more of their back catalog, although that is on my agenda to get to, especially starting from like the earlier stuff, because I'm pretty curious what the post-chillwave stuff sounds like. But this was right around the time, like I was saying earlier, that I started the podcast. I had also seriously considered covering that album on the podcast. It's like one of the first episodes. I guess I may have just been too intimidated to review it. I'm really not sure what happened. It was very hard for me to kind of get the wheels rolling when I was doing like the first couple episodes. So yeah, not entirely sure what happened to that, but I did miss a good opportunity to talk about the album back then. Because it is a solid project. It's a great album, probably one of the best albums of 2020. And just some notes on that project. It opens up with one of the lead singles called Gospel for a New Century. This is the track that probably made me gravitate to Yves Tumor the first time I ever heard it. I just completely was captivated by the track. I dug it. I knew that this artist was good. The track itself features nice pocket drumming, smooth bass lines, and a big horn section as an opening hook for the track. The track really has a grandiose sound to it, especially in the chorus when all the textures come together and become almost homogenized into this huge wall of sound. It's a great way to kick off the album. Medicine Burn is a chaotic track with more pocket drumming. That's just about the only thing that's orthodox about the track, though. There are so many samples and synths just emerging in and out of it that the track is just a fever dream, really. It sounds like a controlled nightmare that's meticulously planned out in order to engulf whoever's listening to it. Identity Trade features some nice drum chops that are tightly accompanied by a busy bass line. The robotic effect in the vocals makes the track feel appropriately like metallic. It's weird. The track also features more chaos with these jazzy woodwind textures that really have no business being thrown on the track, but yet end up working. Kerosene is probably one of the more straightforward pop influenced tracks that feature a nice duet with a female vocalist that ends up becoming quite charming. The track Romanticist sounds like a twisted and contorted version of the very ending of Earth, Wind, and Fire's Shining Star, especially like on the chorus of this track. The melodic material and the vocals is just so damn similar. Dream Palette is a track that features an extremely gritty and buzzy bass line that just punches through the track. The female vocals that are provided to make this track just so much more colorful and exciting as well. Nice and tight pocket drumming on this track too. Strawberry Privilege is probably one of my favorite tracks on this whole project. It's an extremely well-paced track that's just so gravitating, from the sensitively played drum track with the accents on the fourth beat, the rumbling and fat bass line that guides the track so perfectly, the angelic backing vocals, it all just works so well. It's a really beautiful track. And I guess those are just some highlights on that project. I really think it's a solid album all throughout. Just really every track has some characteristic to it that's just so unique and then interesting. I will say that's something that Yves usually throws on each of their tracks. There's not really many points, especially on this last project, where I thought it was maybe dull or just something I wanted to get past. So I will say the music is very present. It's there. It's kind of in your face, but there's always something to look out for, listen to, and it's just very well produced experimental music. That is almost genreless in a sense. There's hints of rock in there, some R&B, some pop, but really it all just comes together to whatever Yves has as their own style. And on this new project here, Asymptotical World EP, I really think it's consistent. It's captivating from front to end, and I think maybe he improves in some facets, especially maybe throwing in some more rock and post-punk flavor on some of the tracks, and then maybe just going into like a jammy, more straightforward rock direction. We started on the opening track, Jackie. That's kind of a good example of like some of the rock influence that's on here. There's some lush, grand, and saturating textures, especially in the synths as the track opens up. A flavorful drum track with nice textures all throughout. A nice syncopated hi-hat thrown in. And I really like the passionate vocal performance by Yves. Sometimes Yves' vocals kind of take the back burner. They're not at the forefront of a track. I'd say on this track, definitely the vocals are, and it's a nice vocal performance as well. The track has a large presence that's practically unavoidable in paying attention to, so it's just a track that works. It really starts the EP off well. After that, we have another great track, Crush Velvet. The track is structured around this punchy bass groove that guides the track. I dig the clean guitar textures in the pre-chorus, love the effects on the vocals that make the performance all that more interesting. The punchiness of the drum track as well guides the track nicely. The eerie guitar effects on the second verse work well. The instrumental breakdown we get after the second verse, I'm really digging as well. I'm really digging how this track grows in presence that just makes a statement as the track hits its climax and then ends. Really great track right there, Crush Velvet. After that, we get one of the more interesting ones. Secrecy is incredibly important to the both of them. I feel like the title of the track takes from like the 2000s post-punk or like emo scene, when I guess like bands were doing the really long song titles. But yeah, I found that interesting. Love the post-punk new wave fusion on this track. Love the dark color that's on this ostinato guitar melody that's featured all throughout the track. The running 8th note bass progression is nice as well as the track, kind of develops. The tone is a bit gritty and dirty. The bass also ends up becoming melodic at points, which makes the track all that more interesting. Like how the track is different from the previous two as well, but it's equally captivating. And then here's a good example of when Yves kind of takes the vocals as kind of like a secondary feature of the track. They sound ominous, but it's not bad. It's really nice. After that, we get a cool track titled Tuck featuring the artist Naked. I'm not familiar with who they are, but they definitely make this track what it is. This track is much more atmospheric overall, like the breathy and soft vocals provided here by Naked. It reminds me of like the eerie and dark nature that would be on like the old Crystal Castles music. I like the swift hi-hat work on this drum track, the chaotic and synthy backdrop that just coats the track. Really digging the melodic synth bass that adds so much more flavor to this track. It's a really interesting track overall. After that, we get the track And Loyalty is a Nuisance Child. Love the more gritty rock presence on this track. Here is probably one of the better, examples of how he's incorporating like distorted guitar in the track, and just like some more classic guitar aesthetic. Seems very fitting to be towards the ending of this project as well. I'm digging the looming anticipation that's created by the soft and hushed vocals prior to the grand and lush chorus section. That's filled with like wailing vocals and distorted guitars. The drum track sounds very live here. Up until here, I felt like a lot of it was maybe drum machines or just synthetic textures. Here, you can definitely tell it's a live drum track, I'm thinking. There's some nice subtle synth string textures I'm hearing as well. A bit of like a shoegaze influence with a large wall of sound that's created at points. And I feel like one of the interesting features of this track is that there's like this nasally vocal delivery that I guess kind of comes off naturally when Yves sings. And I think it sounds a bit like a Frankenstein Lenny Kravitz song. That's what feels like. There's just some hints of it, Lenny Kravitz music in here. I could be wrong, but then after that, we get the ending track, Katrina, which I think was probably the second single off of this EP that was released. I think the track features some more live drumming, more of like the gritty rock presence here as well. That was on the last track. And I love the opening buzzy and gritty guitar riff. It sounds really nice. Another track that's guided by running gritty eighth bass note lines. Really digging the ambient vocal effects all throughout the track. Also the vocal ad-libs that fill the track all throughout. Some nice contrast with the turned down moments that are light and ominous in comparison to the rest of the track. So there's some nice dynamic contrast here and there. Not a bad cut. Maybe I feel like maybe it had some more untapped potential though. I feel like Katrina was maybe, deserving maybe a bit more development, but it's still a really great track. And yeah, by this time we're at the end of the EP. Kind of on the longer side for an EP. It's 6 tracks, and I feel like, this was maybe a lot of these tracks were even album worthy. I'm not sure why they chose to put stuff on an EP, but nonetheless, really psyched that this project came out this year. It's probably one of my favorite projects thus far this year. And I would recommend this EP to anyone that's really just curious about Yves Tumor music, or if they were a fan of the previous project. I think there's plenty on this EP that they would be a fan of as well. But yeah, I'm not really sure who Yves Tumor's music is really designed for. It could just be like the cigarette smoking hipster that wants to listen to something different. I don't know. But I feel like there's a lot of accessibility of this music that people that just like, straightforward rock, or maybe just like straightforward alternative rock can maybe get into. There's just like some really loud sounds. I think maybe a lot of people that dig shoegaze can maybe get something out of this project. I don't know. But nonetheless, if you haven't listened to this project, by all means check it out. But thanks for listening to the review. And I don't know. Not really too much to say. I don't really rate EPs, but this is a really damn good project. It would probably be on the upper echelon of things I've heard this year. Because really, this year hasn't really been terrible with music. Although I don't really review albums that I think are bad. But other than that, it's just been a lot of like very good to okay, which isn't bad. But when stuff really sticks out or just wows me, that's a really nice thing to find. So nonetheless, check out this EP. Thanks for tuning in this episode of the EP review. I don't really know if this is going on the podcast side. I think there's a good chance it will, but I'm just going to put it on YouTube first for shits and giggles. But nonetheless, thanks for tuning in. My name is Josh. Stay tuned for more album reviews. I think I'm also going to throw in Worth the Listen here in the coming days or weeks. We'll see. Nonetheless, take care of yourselves. I'll see you later.